If you ask someone when the world was closest to ending, they will usually say October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. They are wrong. In 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev were talking. They were negotiating. They were scared, but they were communicating. 20 years later, in 1983, the phone lines were dead. 1983 was the year the Cold War stopped being cold and turned freezing. It was the year Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. It was the year he announced Star Wars, a space-based shield that would make Soviet missiles useless. To the West, this was deterrence. To the East, it was a death sentence. But the real danger wasn't in Washington. It was in a sterile hospital room in Moscow. Lying in a bed, hooked up to dialysis machines, was Yuri Andropov, the General Secretary of the Soviet Union. He was formerly the head of the KGB, a man who spent a lifetime looking into shadows and seeing monsters. He is dying. His kidneys are failing. And a dying man has no patience for diplomacy. Andropov is convinced, absolutely convinced, that the Americans are planning a surprise nuclear first strike. He believes Reagan wants to wipe the Soviet Union off the map before Andropov takes his last breath. And because he believes it, he decides to make it come true. Paranoia is usually a feeling. Andropov turned it into a system. In 1981, he initiated the largest peacetime intelligence gathering operation in history, Operation Orion, nuclear missile attack. The goal was simple: do not miss the signs of the apocalypse. KGB agents across the globe were given a checklist. They were ordered to report on the preconditions of war. But look at the list. Are bankers working late? Is the price of blood plasma rising? Are religious leaders meeting with government officials? Is there a flu epidemic because a biological weapon might look like the flu? This wasn't intelligence. It was a confirmation bias machine. The KGB residencies in London and Washington knew it was nonsense. They knew the Americans weren't preparing for war. But they were terrified of Andropov. So they fed the machine what it wanted to eat. They reported the lights on in the Pentagon. They reported the late-night pizza deliveries. Every piece of data fed into Moscow was interpreted as one thing. The countdown has started. The tension breaks on September 1st, 1983, 2 months before Able Archer. Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian 747 carrying 269 people, accidentally strays into Soviet airspace. The Soviet Air Defense Forces, jumpy, terrified of American spy planes, don't ask questions. A Sukhoi fighter jet fires 2 missiles. The plane falls into the Sea of Japan. Everyone dies. The world explodes in outrage. Reagan calls it a massacre against humanity. But inside the Kremlin, the narrative is different. They don't apologize. They double down. They convince themselves the airliner was a CIA probe, a test of their defenses, a prelude to the invasion, and then the final straw. NATO begins deploying Pershing II missiles to West Germany. These aren't normal nukes. These are first strike weapons. They can hit the Kremlin in 6 to 8 minutes. If you are Yuri Andropov sitting in that hospital bed, your reaction time just vanished. You no longer have time to verify a warning. If the radar blips, you have to fire. There was one man who tried to stop what was coming, Oleg Gordievsky, a high-ranking KGB officer in London, but secretly a double agent working for British intelligence, MI6. In late October, Gordievsky sends a desperate message to his handlers. He tells them, "You don't understand. Moscow isn't posturing. They are terrified. They think you are going to hit them now. The West ignores him. The CIA analysts look at the Soviet Union and see a superpower. They assume the Soviets are rational. They assume the Soviets know that NATO is a defensive alliance. They cannot conceive that the men in the Kremlin are huddled in a bunker, shaking with fear over a routine drill. NATO thinks they are flexing their muscles in a mirror. They don't realize the person on the other side of the glass is holding a loaded gun. November 2nd. The exercise begins. Able Archer 83. It is designed to practice the release procedures for nuclear weapons, but the scriptwriters for this year's drill wanted realism. Day 1. Orange forces invade Finland. Day 2. Conflict spreads to Norway. Day 3. Conventional war rages across Europe. NATO forces in Europe put on their chemical warfare suits. They practice radio silence procedures. To a spy satellite, radio silence looks exactly like the moment before a launch. It's the deep breath before the scream. Worse still, the Soviets have their own eyes inside NATO. Rainer Rupp, codenamed Topaz, is a deep cover agent inside NATO headquarters. He is sending flash messages back to Moscow. He confirms, yes, they are requesting launch codes. Yes, the safes are being opened. He is reporting the drill accurately, but Moscow reads it as reality. November 7th, the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. While Red Square is hosting a parade, the bunker underneath is hosting a nightmare. NATO raises the alert level to DEFCON 1 for the simulation. General Secretary Andropov receives a flash cable. The nuclear suitcases, the Cheget, is brought to his hospital bedside. In Brussels, NATO officers are drinking coffee, reading from binders that say exercise only. In East Germany, the Soviet Fourth Air Army is loading real nuclear bombs onto Su-24 Fencer jets. This is the moment history forgot. In Poland and East Germany, Soviet nuclear forces are not drilling. They are mobilizing for World War III. SS-20 mobile missile launchers disperse into the forests. Targets in London, Paris, and Frankfurt are programmed into the guidance systems. Pilot briefings are held. The machine has taken over. Operation Orion has found the pattern it was built to find. The fate of the world now rests on the shoulders of Lieutenant General Leonard Perutz. He is the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence at U.S. Air Forces Europe. His analysts rush into his office. They have picked up the Soviet activity. They see the jets. They see the nukes on the rails. The analyst says, "Sir, this doesn't look like a drill on their side. They are going to Condition 1. Perutz is trapped in a dilemma known as the security dilemma. If he reacts, if he raises the alert level of U.S. forces, the Soviets will see it. They will see the Americans flinch. It will confirm their paranoia. They will launch because they think the U.S. is launching. But if he does nothing, and he is wrong, he will be the man who watched the missiles arrive." He reaches for the phone to call General Minter. He is supposed to recommend a counter-escalation. He lifts the receiver. He holds it for a second, 2 seconds, and then he puts it back. He decides to wait. He decides to let the hallucination play out. He tells his staff, "Let's see if they calm down when we stop." For the next 12 hours, Perutz sits in the eye of the storm, watching the radar, waiting for the streak of white light that signals the end of everything. November 11th, the exercise ends. NATO goes back to DEFCON 5. And just as Perutz hoped, the Soviet mobilization collapses. The jets power down. The nukes go back to the igloos. The SS-20s come out of the woods. the Soviets realize the Americans aren't attacking. Months later, the CIA writes a post-mortem. They combine the data from Gordievsky and the NSA intercepts. They present it to President Reagan. Reagan reads the file. He turns pale. He writes in his diary, "I had no idea they were so scared of us." It changes him. The evil empire rhetoric stops. Within 2 years, he is sitting down with Mikhail Gorbachev in Geneva. We like to think that history is made by great men making great speeches. But in November 1983, civilization was saved by silence. It was saved because one spy tried to warn us, and one general trusted his gut over his protocol. We survived the Phantom War. But the question remains, in an age of AI, automated defense systems, and hypersonic missiles, if the same hallucination happened today, would we have time to put down the phone?